Audience, you can't see it, but I just had the delight of watching our Justin Harris dance as we entered this webinar. So bonjour mes amis, and hello to all of those that dance now and will dance again at the end with us. My name is Dr. Krista Kosterman, and I am the CSO here at the DNA Company. And I have the delight this evening of exploring something that impacts a lot of people, especially as we get older. As we get older, we know that sometimes our immune system starts to decline, and how you may notice that, how that may show up in your day-to-day life, is that it becomes a little bit easier for you to be catching, whatever it is going around, be it a cold, be it a flu, whatever, pick your virus or bacteria du jour, right? As we get older, unfortunately, because some of our immune function starts to fade, those buggies and critters may produce illness more easily within the body. So today what we're going to be exploring is how genes can influence that in positive ways and negative ways, and what you can do about that. So if you have your DNA 360 with us, I'd really encourage you at this point to pull that out so that as we talk about different genes, you can see your own presentation and you can know how relevant some of the advice is, especially based on your genotype. So Vinny and Katie in the chat are going to put in a link to our app. You have two ways that you can get your DNA 360 with us. One is through the patient portal. The other is through the app. The genes that we're going to be looking at today, and as I speak them, Justin is going to type them into the chat so that you can see them there as well. The first one that we're going to be looking at is FOXO3, and that will be located in your longevity report. The other genes that we're going to be looking at are MTHFR, and that is going to be in your methylation report. You'll find your methylation report in the anti-inflammatory section. We're also going to be looking at GSTM1, and that will be found in the glutathinization, a lot of syllables there, report, and that's also going to be in the anti-inflammatory section. We're also going to be looking at SOD and GPX. That's going to be within the antiox report in the same inflammation system. And I believe we're also looking at VDR, which is going to be in the vitamin D report, also in the inflammation section. So almost everything inflammation report and the sub-reports that you find there, except for FOX, which is going to sit in your longevity report. Now, without more ado from me, let me welcome the ever-dancing Justin Harris to the stage. Also, bonjour, monsieur.
Hello, good to be here. And it's an important topic that we're covering today. And it's like when you were going over those genes and you mentioned that so many of them are in the inflammation report, that's pretty appropriate because, well, we know that the immune system incites inflammation, right? Inflammation is part of the immune response. So it makes a lot of sense that we would be looking at a lot of genes kind of within that segment. And, this is such an important topic because it's the body's ability to recognize a threat and then incite the appropriate response to deal with that. And it's funny, there's almost like a somewhat predictable pattern that I've noticed or that happens with chronic illness. It's not just me that's noticed it, obviously, but the body, it gets exposed to stressors of various forms, mental, emotional, biochemical, physical stressors. And this impacts your hormones, right? So it kicks off cortisol to DHEA ratio. And then that puts your body in a catabolic state. And once your body is in that catabolic state, that impacts the gut, right? And up to 80% of your immune system lives in the gut. And once that starts to become compromised, now digestion is compromised and we get opportunistic bacteria working their way in. And that can impact your circadian rhythm. And it's this big cascade that's pretty predictable and happens over and over again. But it involves all of the Asians, right? So the glutathionization, the antioxidation, all manner of detoxification are really relevant here. And those have a lot of genetic coding elements to them. And so knowing the genes, right? Understanding where are we strong, where are we weak, that can really sort of influence your immune system as you age. And then it also allows us to know where should we reinforce and place our interventions so that you can age gracefully and hopefully have a strong immune system well into 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond.
Yeah, I love that. I value that context and positioning, right? Because sometimes it's really tempting to boil down a subject like immunity to just our immune actors, forgetting that our immune actors live within the body and are influenced by the body. Yeah. So I see our first question of the evening. So audience, if you have questions, please ensure you put them within the Q&A and we'll be answering them at the end of the webinar. But this question from Sharon is very appropriate. Sharon's asking, how long is this webinar? Sharon, so typically our webinars are about an hour and a half, an hour of Justin and I talking back and forth and sharing our thoughts on the subject. Then the last 30 minutes usually is dedicated to Q&A. So depending on your time zone, my time zone, this will be done at around 7:30, and that's Eastern. Justin, you're in the glory of the Pacific time zone. So that'll be, when are we done for you?
4:30 PST will be done.
There we go. All right. And for those that do want a replay, this will be available on our YouTube, as well as I believe Katie or Vanny can link in the comments where you can kind of click to see one page listing out all the webinars that we've done. Okay. All right, Justin. So why don't, with awareness that immune decline is not just about the immune system, why don't we at least start with, let's talk a little bit about the immune system and this concept of immunosenescence. So let's start with the immune system. What exactly is it?
Right. So, I mean, the immune system, there's many different cells in the body that exist to deal with an insult, right? That insult can be a GI pathogen, it can be an injury, right? Something that creates that immune response in the body. It can be a food that you have an allergen to. And the body will incite a defense, right? It's got a list of first responders. That's called the innate immune system. And if the innate immune system can't quite get rid of the insult, then we have another one that's called the adaptive immune system. Another term for that is acquired immune system. And that's where there's things like B cells and T cells. So these are really important cells that kind of get switched on when the body notices that there's something off. There's something that's sort of insulting it or attacking it. And so we have this immune system, and the immune system is there to do exactly that. It's important to remember that there's X amount of resources that the body has to allocate to various insults that come into the body, right? So we almost have this reserve of not immunes, but this reserve of different immune kind of cells that we can actually distribute to deal with the insult. So once that starts to get taxed more and more, we have these autoimmune issues and this immunocompromisation that happens because we've sort of depleted our reserves. And so the genes certainly come in here because we can see what systems are already somewhat compromised at a baseline. Right? We look at antioxidation and we can see, well, do you have proper mitochondrial detoxification? If not, that's one of those areas where you don't have a heck of a lot of reserve to work with, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why we incorporate genes into the immune system conversation, because it's not just about histamine and T cells, et cetera. It's really, when you zoom out, about the efficacy of all of these systems that the body uses to defend itself. And that's the gut. That's a lot of different things. So that's the immune system. And there's a lot of connective tissue between the genes, because those are what are encoding the cellular processes behind the whole thing.
Yeah. A lot of immune senescence is driven by a decline in T cells. And so Justin did mention that was part of our acquired or adaptive immune system. And the one thing to be very mindful, especially as we get older and that inability to kind of fight off certain things, this acquired immune system is something, kind of think about it like a memory, a record, a story of what your body has experienced. So when your body experiences something, it's the job of the acquired immune system to identify that, to keep a memory of it, so that if it ever sees it again, right, that it knows right away to attack it. So as we get older, that ability to record the memory, in particular through the T cells that Justin mentioned, isn't as strong or robust. Meaning if you get something, your body may forget it. Later on, you kind of almost have to deal with it with your innate immune system, that no memory immune system, right away. And so knowing that, as Justin has said so eloquently, knowing that we don't have as many of those memory cells, if you will, as we get older, protecting the ones we have and keeping the environment as clean as we can, because we already know as we get older, that risk of autoimmune and a few other things is going to be increasing, keeping things as in a reduced inflammation state as possible, as clean as possible in terms of oxidative stress. becomes all the more important. And as Justin is gracefully guiding us, this is where genes come in. Your genes are the basis of a lot of that protection, and knowing where you're weak in certain points can focus how you go about supporting your immune system and the reduction of that inflammation.
Absolutely. And with that being said, before we forget, I would like to read out the poll just to see kind of where our
Ooh.
audience is at tonight, because I know we're about to get right crazy with some genes. So if the angels in the back wouldn't mind pulling that up, thank you very much. So we asked a handful of questions here. The first one was, how would you describe your immune system as you've aged? And it's a somewhat even split, actually. 29% of you are saying strong as ever. 38% saying I recover more slowly. I've noticed that, even just being 34, from 24 to 34, I actually do recover not as well as I used to. So that's real.
It's
6%
wasted on
said
the
I
young.
get, I know. 6% said I get sick more easily than before, and 28% said about unsure. If you're not looking at exact metrics, right, it's a little bit difficult to determine exactly what's going on in the body. But it will decline with age. But it's one of these things where we need to bear in mind there's a lot of contributing factors, and we need to identify those and reinforce those that really determine what the rate of that is looking like for individuals. The second question we asked is, when you think of immune decline, so what do you think causes it most? 16% said aging itself. 41% said stress and lifestyle. I love where you guys are at. 38% said poor nutrition, gut health. That's definitely an important factor. And then 5% said genetics. So we'll talk about that a little bit later tonight. Number 3 is, have you ever taken a consumer DNA test? 66% said yes through the DNA 360. That's us. Thank you, guys. 11% said yes, another genomic test. 16% have not taken any, but you're curious about it. And then 6% just says not sure what it involves, because it is kind of a newer thing. The fourth question is, which of these areas would you like to most improve? So 21% said your energy levels. 13% said immune strength. 8% said recovery after illnesses or periods of stress. And then a whopping 59% said longevity and healthy aging. Very important. The fifth and final question is, what would you most like to gain from tonight's session? So 10% of you said why the immune system weakens with age. 21% said how genes influence immune health. 40% said how to slow immune aging. 28% said new genomic or functional health tools. Those are always fun. And 1% said others. So please feel free to add that into the chat, and maybe we can incorporate it into the conversation later on.
So Justin, sir, why don't we dive into some of the genes that we've been talking about? So audience, Justin, maybe if you want to start on FOXO3, audience, if you want to know your result for this, you want to go to the longevity report, and it's one of the first genes presented, if not the first. So just jump into your longevity report to see your presentation.
Yeah, and your longevity report, it's kind of got little bits and pieces from a bunch of the different reports. That's really trying to act as just an indicator of how well you're going to age in various ways. And FOXO3 is funny because they do actually call it the longevity gene, quote unquote. I take a little bit of issue with that, right? Because it's like, we know and we talk about genes not existing in a vacuum. And what gene isn't going to impact your longevity? Right? Like all the ones that are associated with your metabolism. I mean, that's going to matter. Detoxification, vitamin D. I think they're all longevity genes that we look at in one respect or another. But this one is highlighted a little bit there.
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting history too, right? And I think this speaks so much to the history of genes. When FOXO3 was first identified, it was seen principally in populations or groupings of people who had incredibly long, and this is the important qualifier, and healthy lives. And so there's this thought of maybe this is finally our fountain of youth, the panacea that is. And that's why it was nicknamed the longevity gene without really knowing the behind the scenes action. What Justin is going to say, the behind the scenes action, and this is what it influences and why it supports and cultivates longevity in so many different populations.
Yeah, and so it is very important, right? It's an important pathway. This is something that in conversations with patients, I normally sort of pair it with things like SOD2 and glutathione because it's going to all matter for how your cells, detoxify and replicate, et cetera, apoptosis, all of those things. But FOXO3 is interesting because it kind of acts as like a cellular, stress response regulator, I guess you could call it, and it really influences DNA repair, DNA synthesis. It causes your body to deal with the cytokine storms and things like that that come when you get an infection or when you get an illness. The FOXO3 gene really matters with all of that. And we don't really have like a suboptimal genotype that we look at. We've actually got more of like you've either got the T alleles or you've got the G alleles. And if you have a GT, you have advanced longevity. So that's a good format. Or if you have the GG, you have what we call superhuman longevity. So that would be like the really ideal form of FOXO3. But there's no like suboptimal genotype. It's either normal or it's advanced or it's superhuman. So just so you know, when you're looking over your report, you're not going to see a suboptimal FOXO3, but you're going to see either normal or super duper amazing awesome genotypes.
I wish that's how we reported it in our reports. Super duper spectacular, super fragilistic expialidocious. Robin, I'm seeing your comment that my volume is lower. This is a perpetual problem, and I don't know how to fix it beyond. I'm not sure how to fix it. We got me a mic and it's not working, but I'll try and speak up a little bit and hopefully that is helpful. Yeah, so as Justin mentioned, one of the principal actions there of Fox is this immune system cleanup, this anti-inflammatory impact, as well as very specific. It is shown in certain studies to be very protective of T cells. T cells, again, being that response. The immune system has identified, hey, we know this virus, bacteria, we know it's not good for us. And so FOXO3 is part of that support to protect those cells so they can actually go in and do their job, as opposed to being weakened or eaten up by other processes within the body. Yeah. So the next suite of genes that we're going to look at here, and Justin really wisely coupled them to FOXO3, are going to be a few of our cleanup cells. Okay, and so this is going to be SOD2 and GPX, as well as GSTM1. Justin, do you want to talk about maybe the coupling of SOD2 and GPX?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm trying to adjust my voice a little bit here because I naturally speak really loud. So I'm going to try to make it so you guys don't have to adjust your volumes as much. But SOD2 and GPX, it's really important. It exists in the mitochondria. It stands for superoxide dismutase. That's SOD2. The full name is actually manganese superoxide dismutase because manganese is a really important nutrient for sort of facilitating this. And then GPX is glutathione peroxidase. So we look at three other glutathione genes, but GPX would kind of be the fourth because it really does matter for that phase 2 detoxification. So these two work in tandem within the mitochondria, right? So every moment that you live, your mitochondria are creating the energy so that you can live, right? So it's creating the ATP, and that's what each and every cell runs on in the body. And we need that. But every single second that your mitochondria are creating ATP, which is great, they are also creating a byproduct to that ATP. This is the fire in the body, right? This is what's giving you energy. And when we light a fire, what happens? There's smoke. There's a natural byproduct that happens. This is going on in your mitochondria all the time. And your mitochondria, I mean, we've done so many webinars about it because they're really important. There's tons in your brain, there's tons in your heart, tons in your muscles. And the more that your body accumulates that smoke, which is actually free radicals, right? Reactive oxygen species, we call them ROS. It basically means that your mitochondria are getting gummed up with those toxins, and it can really impair mitochondrial function over the long term if you don't do something to support that. So it's very important. So superoxide dismutase, you break down that term a little bit. Well, what is it doing? It's making it so that these superoxides, it's getting rid of them. So it's the first stage of the antioxidation pathway that we look at. It's a HEPA filter clearing the free radicals. So I believe it was Dr. K who initially said this about the soaping and scrubbing of the dishes. And I still use that analogy to this day. So let's all give Dr. K some credit. because basically SOD2 is that first part. So it soaps and it scrubs the dishes, but then GPX, glutathione peroxidase, it rinses them and clears them away. Because otherwise you're going to put them back on the shelf and they still have gunk on them, right? So we don't want that. We want a good balance between SOD2 and GPX. So ideally, these have the same speed. So when you look in your antioxidation report, you're going to see that SOD2 has C's and T's. The T's are slower, right? So if you have a CT, it's going to reduce SOD2 function by 30 to 40%. If you have a TT, it's going to reduce it by up to 70%. Now, with GPX, you want it to match the speed of the SOD2, regardless of what that SOD2 looks like. If it's slow, you do actually want GPX to be slow to match it, because at least the dishes are getting cleared properly, right? If one is really slow and one is really fast, there's a buildup of hydrogen peroxide, because that's like a middle chemical that gets made in there. And it's pretty toxic to the body, right? So we want the appropriate speed. There's a lot of ways that you can improve mitochondrial detoxification, but this is really important for immune function and different things in the body. So have a look in your reports and see what the pairing of those two look like.
Yeah, yeah. The ability of your SOD2 and your GPX to keep things clean within the kitchen, that is the mitochondria, is very important, because T cells in particular, a lot of immune cells, but T cells in particular, are incredibly hungry when it comes to energy, right? And we know that, high school has taught us, it's not made us all sleeper cells. When I ask you, what does the mitochondria do? We say powerhouse of the body. And so having a clean kitchen is very important to keeping the integrity and the wholeness and the wellness of a lot of your immune cells. And I think additional to that, I've added to this analogy a little bit, because for those that haven't really taken science past high school, that really haven't explored the mitochondria beyond being the powerhouse of the cell, audience, I want you to think for a moment, what happens in your kitchen, right? We know in your kitchen, you're absolutely, cleaning your dishes, but there's also going to be probably a kitchen table that you serve your food on, right? That you get all your dishes dirty on. And at that kitchen table, there's a lot of conversation. There's, moms coming in and saying, oh, this is what happened at work. Dad's coming in and saying, oh, this is what happened at work. Daughter's there being like, this is what happened at school. There's sharing between different members of the family who all live very different lives as to what's going on, right? And so we want, again, that kitchen to be clean so that people are coming and eating at it and not getting sick. And this becomes very important, because immune cells and mitochondria in particular is very much support some of the direction within the immune cell using hydrogen peroxide, amongst other things. So if the kitchen's dirty, if the mitochondria is dirty, this conversation is not happening. And this can lend to further worsening and further aggravation of the immune system, right? So just like you want clean dishes and a clean kitchen so people will come and eat and nourish and talk, you want balanced, good GPX SOD2 so that your mitochondria is clean, so it can protect cells and communicate within the immune system. Yeah.
Dr. K is the queen of the analogies tonight. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I also just love family dinner. It makes my soul happy. So anytime I can reduce something down to family dinner, I will. Do you want to explore Oh, so close.
GSTM one?
Yes, sir. It's alphabet soup tonight. That's what we're having for family dinner, audience. We're all having alphabet soup. Let's dive into it.
Yeah, our job is alphabet soup, honestly. And GSTM1 is really important. We've talked about it before in relationship to the immune system. Like I said at the beginning of the call, I mean, your gut is really, really major player there, right? A lot of this is housed in the gut. There's the mast cells to be considered, things like histamine. I mean, these are direct responses of the immune system, and they really operate within the gut. And the gut has got this kind of double-edged sword that, like, the gut needs to be healthy to keep the immune system healthy, and the immune system has to be healthy to keep the gut healthy. Because if you don't have a good stress response and different things, all of these things are connected, and you can compromise the gut by compromising the HPA axis and vice versa. There's a lot of nervous system components going on in there. So the gut also has this burden of having to detoxify itself because of what we've done to the food supply, unfortunately, in modern times. So anytime that your gut takes in something that it could kind of construe as an insult, right? Toxins or glyphosate, whatever it is, the immune system is going to get kicked on over and over again. It has to. And so we have this gene, GSTM1, it's in your glutathionization reports, and it's measured as a CNV, or a copy number variation. So how many did you get from your parents? Did you get 0 copies like me? Did you get 1 copy, or did you get 2 copies? And all of them have their own little kind of nuances. So GSTM1, glutathione conjugation at the level of the gut. This is a major player for detoxifying your gut. Now, if you have what we call a null, a double null, that means you didn't receive the instructions for how to detoxify your gut. Remember, genes are like little instruction manuals for like what the cells do and how do you behave. So if you have 0 copies of that GSTM1, you're missing that gene, and it can lead to what we call a princess gut, where you kind of react to different things really easily. You can't handle stuff, right? Because the instructions behind it are just not there. So that's a double null for GSTM1. Interestingly, we have identified a paradox here where 2 copies, which you would think on paper is the ideal circumstance, because we're talking about the gut and because we're talking about food and digestion, etc., 2 copies has turned out to be quite the over aggressive form. So 2 copies of GSTM1 means your gut is kind of too good at detoxifying things, and it's kicking on the immune response because it's like pointing and saying, that's an enemy, we should get rid of that. And a whole lifetime of that, inciting that immune response, it can lend itself to a wearing away of the mucosal barrier. The mucosal barrier is necessarily thin, but it's got a paradoxical role in that it's supposed to let nutrients in and it's supposed to keep bad guys out, right? So if the immune response is being kicked on over and over ever since you're born till now, it just wears it away and it thins it out. And that's why I encourage people to test things like zonulin and histamine to DAO ratio and different things. You can look at it, but if it is too thin, you're going to start letting in pathogenic species. We call them opportunistic species, and it lends itself to this dysbiosis in the gut. So 2 copies is over aggressive, 0 copies is just not enough. 1 copy is actually the ideal circumstance with GST-M1. And let me tell you, I have seen clinically over and over and over 2 copies, people that have autoimmune stuff because of that never-ending activation of the immune system. Like I've seen rheumatoid arthritis. I'm like, oh, let's see that GST-M1, 2 copies. What do you know? And it's over and over again. So genes are not, we don't use them to diagnose, obviously, but there is clinical correlation. And I've seen a huge pattern there with 2 copies of GSTM1.
Yeah. You ready for another analogy?
Go ahead.
Audience, this is a little bit of an uncouth analogy, but it's very apt. You can kind of think about GST-M1 and the balance you have a little bit like a policing force. So we know that if you have no police force, you have absolutely no one to go after the bad guys. You have no one to go after the bacteria and whatever else is in your gut, and things run amok, right? There's a little bit of chaos within society. That said, if you have too much of a police force and they don't have anything to do, right? Because all the bad guys are caught, then they're going to start harassing normal citizens on the street. And that's a little bit what happens within that autoimmune picture. The body is kind of self-harassing and harassing people that don't need it. And so it lends to a little bit of chaos, but in the opposite way, right? A little bit of the population rebelling against that. So you kind of want that happy medium, enough to catch the bad guys, but not enough that they're bored and kind of harassing people that are, just walking down the street and don't need it. So that's where I'd like you to think of it. And remember, audience, that having 0 or 2 copies, whatever it might be, is information and can just shift how you're approaching your care. With no copies, it shifts how you can go about eating and how you might want to be supporting other glutathione pathways that you have. If you have 2 copies, right, there's a lot that can be done to support gut integrity and to fend off the seeding and the encouragement of autoimmune conditions, right? Everything we talk about on this webinar, on our platforms, is to the end of, now that you know this about yourself, what can I do to better myself, to better my health outcomes? Yeah. So what?
Absolutely. I have whole calls just about gut health with people, honestly. Like
Yeah.
it's really common that it's a contributor. I mean, like people say that all disease begins in the gut. I don't really subscribe to that, but I think it circles back to it. And I think that it's a contributor and it's a main player in most people's health problems. So like we
Mhm.
have the gut 360 that can give you a pretty good idea of what the bugs are looking like in there. And then the GST gene is a really important one to look at as well. If you have the 0 or the 2, then you may want to consider doing a gut 360 as well to kind of see what's actually going on in there. Because, like I say, it opens the floodgates for these opportunistic bacteria, and too much candida and these different things can really have an impact on your health. So it's a good thing to keep your eyes on.
Yeah. I really like our, our Gut 360 premium test. I will sing to the high heavens about that one. Justin, do you want to talk about BDR?
Yeah, sure. So this one, now we're going into the winter time, right? So this is an important one to look at. And this one is if you open your anti-inflammation reports and then you go to the vitamin D section, it's so important it has its own section because there is actually a pathway. And it's funny, vitamin D, people just kind of arbitrarily take 1,000 IUs a day or whatever. And it's just like, I heard vitamin D is good. I once again have whole conversations about vitamin D with people depending on their demographics and their genes and how much time they get outside. And there's also things like nitric oxide to consider. There's K2, there's magnesium, there's a whole thing going on with vitamin D. And we look at a whole pathway because it's more of a hormone, first of all, than it is a vitamin, right? You're not relying so much on diet to get vitamin D. It's more of a hormetic intake than a nutritional intake. When you get sunshine on your skin, your body doesn't make activated vitamin D3. It doesn't make the form that your body can use. It makes a precursor. So we look at a gene called CYP2R1 that converts the precursor to the activated form. Once it's activated, we look at a second gene called GCVDBP, that's vitamin D binding protein. And that's the taxi cab that takes it to the receptor site. And the receptor site is very important here. It's called VDR, vitamin D receptor. And if that's suboptimal, I describe it like it's my turn to use an analogy now, Dr. K. It's basically like a bouncer at a nightclub, right?
Love it.
And some people's bouncer is like texting and he's just willy nilly letting the vitamin D in. And then some people's bouncer is like a hard ass and he's like not letting people through. So if you have the hard ass, well, you have to put more people in the lineup to get more of them ultimately through. So this really influences our dosing protocols that we talk about with vitamin D. If you have suboptimal VDR, it just represents that even if you can get it to the receptor, the actual ability of it to exert its influence on the cells is still suppressed because it has to get into the receptor site to do its job. So we get pretty detailed about our dosing protocols and how we kind of go about that. And it's going to really strongly impact your immune system. I mean, hey, vitamin D, there's over 10,000 functions it has in the body. It is a hormone. We definitely don't want to be deficient in a hormone. And it directly implicates things like gut function, right? We need it for anti-inflammation and immune activation. Vitamin D is so important for that. So VDR is a very important thing to look at for that.
Yeah, agree. I think audience, it is profound when you ask questions around what can I do, knowing your vitamin D status and how your body genetically works with it is very important. Vitamin D status meaning blood work, right? What is your current intake or how is your body receiving that? When it comes to immune, we'd be profoundly remiss not to talk about it, right? It is one of the cornerstones of anything that is immune. And I think sometimes we forget about that when we're trying to search for the new sexy thing. You need to know your vitamin D status. For people that have suboptimal genes, I'd encourage checking once every 4 months, once every 6 months, right? And ensuring that you're able to keep up. Because if you don't have this, even if you're young, I've seen in a lot of younger clients, right, where they should have a good and healthy, robust immune system. If those that come in chronically sick, often the quick fix is simply upping their vitamin D. So if you're an older person and you don't have it, it's kind of like that it needs to be addressed. It's so foundationally important. And I know that's boring advice, but it is some of the best advice that you're going to be getting. So I'll say it again, however boring it is. If you're on this webinar because your immune system isn't working well, go get your vitamin D checked, figure out your status, and listen when Justin says it's not just about vitamin D. We need to think about zinc and boron and a few other cofactors that really help that be integrated magnesium into the body.
Yeah, and can I give another quick pro tip here on this one?
Please.
Yeah, so in your cardiovascular section, if you guys have your DNA 360 handy, there is a gene called NOS3, and especially as we age, nitric oxide production is also one of those things that kind of slows down naturally. But if you have a suboptimal gene there, right? So this is endothelial nitric oxide. It dilates your blood vessels and it has a lot of different functions in the body, and it helps with the delivery of all things, right? Hormones, nutrients. Blood flow is what does that. The bloodstream is what does that. So if we have a suppression in nitric oxide because we don't have good genes, and then just as we age and we don't move as much in things, we don't create as much of this nitric oxide. Nitric oxide releases internally stored vitamin D. It comes along, it helps to sort of release it from the adipose tissue so that your body can use it and distribute it, right? So we have our own sort of sovereign vitamin D section that we look at with the genes, but I tend to pair it with that nitric oxide gene because you may also benefit from some nitric oxide, releasing nutrients like citrulline, arginine, agmatine sulfate, ornithine, beetroot extract, watermelon extract. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can improve nitric oxide, or red light therapy. I have a theory. I guess I don't have a theory. This is the way it works, is that part of the reason sunshine helps is because it also increases nitric oxide. So you're getting the D2 in the precursor, right? Because the sun is causing your cholesterol to convert to that. But then it's also creating more nitric oxide. Like when you suntan, you get more NOS. So I think that also helps to sort of release it. And all of the above can help to improve your body's utilization of vitamin D. When I say you have suboptimal CYP2R1, I don't mean that there's no point in going in the sun. Like you should. It's great for your circadian rhythm. It's great for just your cognition. It's got antidepressant effects. There's plenty of studies showing that. Makes you feel good, right? But nitric oxide is a really important thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about with vitamin D. And I think that it should be a part of that conversation.
Thank you. That's a solid tangent.
Thank you.
Learned something. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. I don't think we have maybe one other gene that we're going to go through, and then audience, Justin and I are going to dive into what are the pro tips that you can take away to support your immune system. So do you want to quickly touch on MTHFR and audience? This is a frequently asked after section, methylation. And so we're only going to dive a little bit into it. If you're interested in a deeper dive into methylation, Katie and Vanny are going to toss into the chat our webinars that dive right down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Steady and I just went crazy on methylation just a couple of weeks back. So check out the webinars that we've done. I mean, we've done some really, really deep dives. So I'll mention it with some brevity today. But MTHFR is a very important part of our methylation cascade. It's part of how our body effectively, synthesizes and creates these methyl groups that your body can use to turn genes on or off. So your methylation cycle is there, and the methylation cycle is absolutely a part of how the body deals with insults, deals with cytokine storms, manages the inflammatory response. If you are turning on too many pro-inflammatory genes because you're over-methylating things, well, that can contribute to pro-inflammation. What we want is a nice balance. You don't want to under-methylate either, because then you're not turning on the ones that are going to help manage the inflammation, right? So MTHFR is a really important step in the methylation cascade. And it is exactly that. It is a cellular cascade where folate enters the cell. It becomes tetrahydrofolate, and then it becomes 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate via a gene called SHMT1. We look at that as well. Then MTHFR converts the 5,10-methyl tetrahydrofolate into 5-MTHF, and that becomes the primary methyl donor. So MTHFR is making a methyl donor. The first one that we look at in the Cascade. And if you have suboptimal MTHFR, for which we look at 2 SNPs, it can really implicate your body as far as its ability to deal with things like homocysteine, convert it properly into methionine. So this can really impact neurotransmitters. This can impact your cardiovascular health, endothelial health. MTHFR is not the only gene that matters in methylation, but it's a key step in that whole relay race. And I encourage you guys to check out our methylation webinars if you really want to go deep, because it's pretty friggin' complicated, but MTHFR is definitely one of the primary movers there.
Thank you, sir. All right. There's a little bit of feedback, so maybe if you want to go on mute when I'm talking, we can flip back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So audience, we want to shift gears a little bit. So I think by gene, we did offer some suggestions as to if you have this presentation, you want to be thinking about that. So we want to transition into, foot to the pavement. And this is what Justin is best at. So I'm very grateful that he's here this evening. Let's start talking about how, regardless of age, what can you do to support your body as a whole, not just the immune system, but your body as a whole, to support your wellness so that you're not getting constantly sick with buggies. And I'll open the floor with, unfortunately, an unpopular one. Audience, when you consume sugar, and I'm talking about a large dose of sugar, right, it depletes your immune activity for, depending on how you're metabolizing it, 4 to 8 hours. Meaning if you go and have all the ice cream and all the candy and all the cake for approximately 4 to 8 hours, you are going to be more susceptible to incurring disease because it will suppress your immune system. So as we jump into the holiday season, as we go to parties where there's a bunch of people and we're eating all the sugar and eating all or drinking all the drinks, something to be mindful of. I'm not saying don't do those things. I think those are perfect and good for the soul, but be very mindful how you walk into that. Ensure you're healthy walking into that, and ensure that you're supporting yourself the day after, right? With a lot of that antioxidant support, etc. So that's my bad news bear first thought for the evening. Justin, why don't you come in with something a bit happier?
Yeah, so there's so many ways to attack this, right? And I would say that controlling the HPA axis response is a really important thing to do as well. I think that nervous system regulation is one of the most important variables to consider, because everything can kick off the HPA axis that your body interprets as stress, right? So, if you're not familiar, it's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is how your body sort of interprets the stress response and connects it to the nervous system. So the limbic system gets activated when your body perceives a stressor, kicks on the HPA axis, and the HPA axis communicates to the adrenals, and it basically causes the cortisol secretion and all those things that take place. But what's really important to remember is that the HPA axis will be kicked off, same with an actual external event as it will with a GI pathogen, or oxidative stress, or leaky gut, bad sleep. The HPA axis kicks off in response to any and all of these stressors at the same time. I've seen over and over again people that have HPA axis dysregulation, and it's kind of incorrectly labeled adrenal fatigue. It's not normally the adrenal gland that's the problem. It's the HPA axis. It's your body is dealing with too many stressors at once. I mentioned the gut earlier for a reason, because it's a really important component of the immune system, and there's a direct cascade that happens here when we have too much HPA axis activation. It causes the cortisol to DHEA ratio to be skewed. The cortisol will activate the mast cells that are in your gut to create pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukins, right? Histamine, TNF alpha, and the body ends up dealing with all of this additional inflammation because you didn't address the stress. It was the stress that was the problem. So I really recommend identifying stressors in your life using lab work, using genes, right? Using just lifestyle coaching and different therapies, because the more that your body is subjected to stress, the more the HPA axis will be kicked off, and therefore the more that you will compromise various systems as a downstream cascade, especially the gut. So the stress response, that's the main thing that I would have to kind of point out right now. HPA axis, supporting that that'll help with your longevity and immune system, no doubt about it.
Agreed. Yeah. And that one's such a difficult one to address too. It's so difficult to tell someone who's stressed to be like, stress less. So we do have quite a few webinars where we dive into ideas, in particular, if you are experiencing stress, how your genes influence that, right? Knowing your genes, how your genes influence us. Stress can be one of the most alleviating things to know, because it's like, oh, it's not in my head. This is how my body takes stress in. And that can really form up a plan of stress regulation for you. Right, as well as Justin often frequents those webinars, and he's the king of here's some practical advice. So audience, make sure you jump into some of those if you're identifying stress is a problem when it comes to your immune system, because you can support your T cells all you want, but if you got some stress, you question that all down. Yeah. The next thing I think that we want to talk about as well is going to be sleep, right? Sleep, and we're talking of fulsome sleep. Most people kind of need about 8 hours, right? Some people it's a little bit less, some people it's a little bit more. If there's women on the call who have periods, that will also change over the course of your menstrual cycle, right? But whatever that magic number is for you, ensuring you get that magic number on a consistent basis is very important. Sleep is the time where, from an immune system perspective, there's essentially a squeegee that goes through your body and cleans everything up. Right? You can kind of think about this, for many offices, for many public spaces, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of activity through the day. And then at the end of the day, you have, while no one else is there, once the building is closed, you have a cleaning crew that comes in and cleans all the trash bins and cleans the counters and cleans all the surfaces so that it's ready, neat, and orderly for the next day. If you're not sleeping, essentially you're not allowing your cleaning crew in to ready your body. And this will accumulate, right? There's absolutely an element of, new parents, if there's something going on in your life, there's absolutely going to be times where you can't do the sleep. It's often that chronic lack of sleep coupled with other things, coupled with poor diet, coupled with stress, etc., that creates this perfect storm. But I would really encourage examining your sleep patterns and seeing what you can do to shift those. Because again, when we think of T cells, when we think about the environment of the body, this is very, very, very important.
Yeah, and sleep is quite the rabbit hole in and of itself, right? I mean, there's so many kind of contributing factors, like even the gut itself. I mean, most of your melatonin is in fact made in the gut. The pineal gland will contribute in the PM, but most of it is actually being made in that GI tract. And all of this stuff is connected, right? Like again, the HPA axis. If you have cortisol spiking in the PM, which is really common, that can interfere with your sleep quality. There's a whole rhythm when it comes to cortisol, and it really impacts your circadian rhythmicity, right? A lot of people I've had even recently, clients that say like, I want to lower my cortisol. And I said, why? And they said, I'm stressed. And I said, well, first of all, we need to understand that cortisol is actually anti-inflammatory. That's why cortisone is a thing, right? That's just the inactive form of cortisol, and they shoot it into an injury with an athlete. And it's there because it decreases inflammation in the area. It gets your blood sugar up, which is what you need in the morning to get you up and going. Knowing what the cortisol is doing and seeing the actual pattern is really, really impactful when it comes to your sleep. I don't encourage you to just blanketly try to, bless you, Dr. K, to lower your cortisol without knowing what it's sort of doing first. With adaptogens, I mean, there's different ways that you can lower it, but if you don't know what it looks like first, you can actually be causing some issues there, right? Like, I don't think you should try to lower your cortisol in the morning, and I don't think you should try to lower it if you don't know that it's high in the first place. When we have a lot of stressors, there's a lot of cortisol being released, and you can have a phase where you're really stressed, but you actually feel really good, right? Because cortisol is co-released with adrenaline, and you can actually have a lot of different, a lot of energy, and you feel like I'm handling my workload and I'm under a lot of stress, but I'm just going and it feels good. But then you get to a place where you're under the same amount of stress and your body and HPA axis will start to sort of malfunction. And now you're not creating enough cortisol. And so you're in more of this compensatory phase where your body will start to compensate in different ways. And it's because you've now reached that HPA axis fatigue. So if that person were to take something to lower their cortisol further, they're going to be that much more fatigued. You want to nourish the HPA axis in different ways and your circadian rhythms in different ways as well. And it's a roundabout way of me saying, again, nervous system regulation directly contributes to what Dr. K was saying about sleep, and the gut is implicated there. All of these systems will impact the next.
Yeah. Yeah. Audience, I think sometimes it's really difficult to hear you should be doing all these things, sleep and don't stress and da. Remember though, that if there's a million ways to get sick, right? If you're not sleeping, if you're not, if you're exposing yourself, if you're this, that, and the third, if you're getting older, if you don't have great genes, if there's a million things that can get you unwell, that also means there's a million things that can get you better. And so I'd really encourage, based on the things that we've talked about tonight, be it a specific gene presentation, be it the commentary that, hey, having a lot of sugar will deplete your immune system, pick one of those things and start to implement it, right? You don't have to boil the whole ocean. The goal is one step at a time. And if you master the first step and that becomes natural, then you can add in a second step. And by the time you get to the end of the year, maybe you have 20 steps, which is so far ahead of having no steps at all. Justin, sir, do you think it's time that we transition into the questions? Because our audience has many for us today.
Yeah, I think we get right to it.
Yeah, right. The first question is for you, sir. Sue is asking, does peptide BCP157 help with systemic inflammation, and can it help lower HSCRP? Audience, HSCRP is a marker of general inflammation, sometimes specific to cardiovascular, but general inflammation within the body. So Sue, we can't really offer specific medical advice, but Justin, do you have any thoughts on BCP157?
Yeah, so BPC is a body protection compound, and it's actually an extract of human gastric juice, and it's just a sequence of amino acids that the body can use in a lot of different intelligent ways. Um, Among its roles is protecting the mucosal layer, right? So it's one of these things that if you have elevated zonulin, body protection compound can help to go in and restore that wall. So it does have some different healing properties and things to it. I recommend doing your research, right? As a practitioner, I can't just say go out and start taking peptides, but I do think that there's a lot of research and value there. Some other things that it does is it increases growth hormone receptor sites, so it can have some decent anti-aging properties to it. And it also increases something called angiogenesis, which is like the formation of new blood vessels. As far as like direct anti-inflammation and impacting your C-reactor protein levels, I don't believe there's a lot of research there, and I wouldn't go that far, but I will say that inflammation is one of these things that gets kicked on when the body has an insult. And it's meant to be sort of a temporary solution where the body addresses it. All good. Now we don't have the need for the inflammation because we've dealt with the insult. If you have an injury or something like that, your inflammation is going to be heightened and your C-reactor protein is going to go up. BPC would have an indirect effect because it can have these various healing properties on the body. I've utilized it myself for gut-related stuff, and I found some pretty notable benefit with it. But it's not going to have a direct 1-2 impact on the CRP. But the CRP is only elevated because of inflammation taking place in the body. Inflammation is only taking place because there's an injury or an insult, and BPC can have an effect on the injury or the insult. So indirectly, it can have some anti-inflammatory effects, but it's not a direct anti-inflammatory. But definitely do your research because it's got some efficacious uses in the medical field. I just can't officially recommend it. So read up on it. I've used it at my own, perhaps peril, but I've noticed that it's been pretty beneficial for myself.
Thank you. All right. The next question that we have here is from Sheila, and Sheila is asking, you've been talking about cellular inflammation and mitochondrial function. Other than diet, exercise, sauna, are there any specific supplements that you would recommend? So Sheila, again, we can't really make a recommendation specific to you, but Justin, maybe you want to talk about mitochondrial optimizer, because that has a few agents that would speak to this.
Yeah, and especially if you look in your genes and you have the suboptimal SOD2 pathway, remember that when I was talking about that, I said the full name is manganese superoxide dismutase. And our mitochondrial optimizer has manganese in there. And then it's got other antioxidants like PQQ and tocotrienols and things that are really specified for improving mitochondrial function and detoxification, right? So when it comes to the recommendation of supplements, I always play the identify the arsonist game, right? And I try to look in the genes and see what areas are like suboptimal and need the support, because otherwise I'll end up recommending 10,000 different supplements. So I try to shore it up by looking at the genes and lab work and things like that first. But our mitochondrial optimizer is one of the few I've seen that has the manganese added in. And then it's also got those added nutrients that help deal with that suboptimal pathway, right? We've had whole webinars again about mitochondria where we talked about like NAD precursors and urolithin A and carbon 60, hydrogen. We did a whole debate about hydrogen. I encourage you guys to go check it out because it was fun. But the real tried and true ingredients are the ones that we included in mitochondrial optimizer, because they're the ones that have the actual backing, right? The research. Like, we know what tocotrienols do, we know what manganese does and how it impacts the mitochondria. So my recommendation would be to check that out, but also look at all the other free information that we've given out, just really zoomed in on these different systems of the body. Our webinars are free and they're on our YouTube channel. Hours and hours and hours of advice is on there. So, you don't have to pay for it. You just log on and check it out, and you can find a lot of cool stuff on there and value, especially if you got the DNA 360 in your hand while you watch it.
Great. All right. This is a bit more of a comment, but I love it. Sharon is saying that she has a stronger immune system at 43 than she did when she was 24. And so it shows, it goes to show, how you can shift. And sometimes this is the most beautiful story. I've heard this story in 60-year-olds and 30-year-olds across different age ranges. And it's the idea that, and Justin also echoed it a little bit, that as you get older, yes, body systems may not be as robust as when you were young, but you know yourself better, and there's more discipline and intention behind your actions to support your body. And so it's also not an uncommon story to hear people age in reverse, in that as they get older, they get more and more comfortable and healthy within their body. Yeah. All right. Dirk has a question for us, and this also goes a little bit to Sheila's question. So Dirk is asking, is beta glucans the best supplement to keep immune systems healthy and robust, and should this be taken daily by older people, and by how much? So what Dirk is getting at is actually a very active compound within mushrooms, and especially when we talk about medicinal mushrooms, not in the psychedelic sort, but in the immune sort. And a lot of these mushrooms will come with a compound called beta-glucan, and it will be really supportive of the immune system. There are studies in older populations that speak to just the beta-glucan extracts. We're not talking about the mushroom complement, but just that, and it will support immune function if you're taking that in the long term. Studies sit between, it's a titrated dose, kind of start off low, will go sometimes as high as 600. Where you sit on that really needs to be discussed with your provider. And you may also want to consider with your provider getting that through mushrooms. For example, I think turkey tail is one of the more bountiful when it comes to beta-glucans, because it's not, I think the beautiful thing about plants is that it's not just going to be that single agent. There's going to be that symphonic complement that supports the immune system. Plants are so neat in that they're not a single agent actor. And I think the more we dive into, can plants help with this, we realize it's because there's many agents within the plant, not because there's just one actor in the plant. So something to consider, though. I would never recommend anyone start mushrooms without talking to a provider, because they can be an immune modulator. And if you don't have an immune system that's ready for them, they won't be helpful to you. So talk to your provider about that one. Yeah. Justin, do you want to take the next question from Ashley? And Ashley's is curious about how saunas help with immune regulation.
Yeah, so your skin is your largest organ, number one. It's a detox organ, number two. The lymph system is directly underneath of it, and there's a lot of storage of different toxins right in that area. So when you do sauna or when you sweat at all, I mean, that's your body getting rid of toxins at will. Every pore is literally releasing them. That's part of how that system works. I think the benefit of sauna is that there's kind of a double-edged sword with exercise induced sweating sometimes, because when we exercise and we sweat and get that phase 3 detoxification through that, we're also creating free radicals because we're elevating our heart rate, right? We're moving our body, we're creating a lot of ATP, and we're creating a lot of those reactive oxygen species with it. The cool thing about the sauna is you just kind of sit there, right? So it's like it creates that hyperthermia, and it raises your body temperature, and that triggers that release from the cells. So your skin is in fact almost like the mucosal barrier. It's the same function in a way. It lets things in and it filters things out. So sauna is great because it's going to allow for that hyperthermia. You get these heat shock proteins, and it's directly causing every pore in your body to just replace the stale fluids, especially if you do it right. Right. So, like when I'm in my sauna, I like to do some dry skin brushing, and that allows for the lymphatic drainage. I might take in some antioxidants and things prior to or after the sauna and just sort of replace those stale fluids in that way. It's great for the mitochondria as well, by the way. It causes mitochondrial biogenesis. So we're creating new mitochondria. And then it's helping that SOD2 pathway because it's increasing just the clearance of those free radicals. They even say that, like with infrared, especially if you have like heavy metal toxicity, the sweat can even be like metallic and like almost mercury looking, because that's the level of like deep detoxification that you get with it. It's associated with a 40% reduction of mortality with cardiovascular issues as well. So it's great for that. You can get exercise benefits without actually exercising. It's got fantastic recovery benefits. The hyperthermia is also cytotoxic to cancer cells as well. So it helps with a lot of these different immune system pathways and things. But the detoxification would be the main thing going on there. And it is every single pore in your body just letting go of it. I like to do my sauna at the end of the day because it's like I accumulate bullshit all day long, and then I just get rid of it right before I go to bed. So I'm a huge fan of sauna, if you can't tell, and especially the infrared, because it triggers a deeper cellular release of those toxins. But a wet sauna is fantastic as well. Infrared specifically, though, I mean, especially if you do it right, you're going to get a lot of great skin detox benefits from it.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Our next question is from Joan, and Joan is asking about the frequency of the FOXO3 G allele. So as Justin had mentioned, the G allele is associated with having better than average compared to other presentations of antioxidant and immune support. And so when we look at the genetic term would kind of be frequency. What is the frequency of this seen within the population? Within African populations, there tends to be high penetrance or a high frequency. I don't remember the exact numbers. It sits between 80 to 90% of the African diaspora will carry this. When we look at the European diaspora, the numbers will vary based on, specific countries and specific regions of Europe, but approximately 40 to 55, 60% of the population will have that G allele. And then when we look at certain Asian populations, there's a lot of varied numbers there. Some populations, I think the Japanese, they only carry it at a rate of about 35%, and then certain other Asian, and this is kind of the general Asian diaspora, I think they carry it at around 50%. So it's not an exceptionally rare gene per se, but what's really important is that the benefit of having that allele. I think so often we talk about genes in terms of, if you have this allele, it's really bad for you because your enzyme isn't working. And we know that when you have the normal type, you function well, but when you have the extra normal type, that's your superpower to a certain extent. And isn't it wonderful that across many different populations, that superpower exists? So, Joan, I hope that's helpful. Justin, I'm going to aggregate a few questions here. So when you were talking about SOD2 and GPX, a lot of different questions came in regards to maybe I have slow function of both, or maybe I don't have balance between my pathways. Maybe SOTA is fast and GPX is slow, or the opposite. When you see that, can you offer the audience some advice as to how they can go about supporting that?
Yes, and there's a lot of different things to consider there. This is also one of those like full conversations I tend to have with people because we're talking about the mitochondria in your body. I mean, it's really important. And first, I'd like to just mention a lab marker that's great that I'm a big fan of for this. And I've mentioned it on these webinars before. It's called 8-OHDG. And that is a pretty direct marker of oxidative stress in the body and how oxidation is impacting your DNA and different things. So that's a really good marker to keep an eye on because it's pretty direct. Like if you have elevated 8-OHDG, then you have oxidative stress and it can be problematic. When we have a buildup of that middle chemical as well, that actually contributes to having your hair go gray or white, right? So that's oftentimes a mitochondrial issue as well, and supporting that is very much in your interest. Now, our body makes antioxidants, and then we're supposed to eat the rest, right? So we take them in, and supporting your body with antioxidants is generally one of your best bets there. In our mitochondrial optimizer, we use the tocotrienols, we use the PQQ, and some of these really reliable antioxidants that we know impact the mitochondria. And then we need to do things like perhaps intermittent fasting, exercising, but doing it right, not overdoing the cardio, doing enough weight training and having a good balance there, triggering the phase 2 detoxification with things like sauna. Cold exposure for some of us is very useful there as well because it increases the efficiency of the mitochondria and it makes them function better, right? So with mitochondria, there's two things. There's the detox, and then there's the function of the mitochondria themselves. When we have too much reactive oxygen species, it's going to implicate both of them, right? You have too much toxins, and then it's going to make it so the mitochondria don't perform as well. There's also things like NAD to consider. So when we have suboptimal pathways here, it can impact the ability of the mitochondria to create the NAD that it needs for all the great things it does, activating sirtuins and dealing with inflammation, etc. So it's basically nutritive pathways. There's hormetic pathways like exercise. There's other hormetic pathways like heat and cold. And then there's detoxification strategies like fasting, taking in dietary antioxidants as well. Like I'm a fan of the Borax scale for this because it shows you the different antioxidant content of different foods. And if you eat a lot of high ORAC foods, that can also help benefit the mitochondria there. Mainly, we want to just know what is the speeds of these two things. And we want to make sure we're not getting a buildup of the intermediate chemical, which will happen regardless if you have an imbalance there. I will say as an asterisk, if the GPX is CC as fast as possible, that can help to clear some of that, right? So I saw if people are saying, well, what if it's really slow SOD2 but really fast GPX? That's more favorable than having really fast SOD2 and really slow GPX, right? Because now we're not even rinsing the dish or not soaping and scrubbing them at all, but we're rinsing them and putting them away. Any of the above is going to make it so that those dishes are not ideally clean at the end of the day. I'm trying to not get too complicated with the analogies here, but yeah, that should hopefully clear it up a little bit. Dr. K, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you did great there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Sharon has our next question. They're asking, can a DNA test help reveal the extent of damage of mold toxicity and its impact on the body? Yes and no. So the DNA 360 test will look at genes that will influence how body is going to be receiving and cleaning up the impact of mold, as well as the susceptibility, I think in particular the susceptibility. But can it test to the damage from exposure and what is going on in your body right now? No. If you're interested in that sort of thing, we have some really strong clinicians at the DNA company that know not only the genes that would influence susceptibility and how you can clean it up through your DNA 360, but the appropriate testing in order to assess for that. So if you're looking for any of that, don't hesitate to reach out to the email is ceo@thednacompany.com. We'll put that in the chat so that you can reach out if you're looking for that level of support. All right, Justin, I'm going to aggregate a bunch of questions for you here. So the next slew of questions that we saw came in regards to GSTM1. So we had that conversation that kind of the two extremes there aren't necessarily going to be great. Can you offer some advice if people have two copies and they're concerned around autoimmunity and kind of the overaggression, for lack of better phrasing, that is happening in the gut, what they can think about? And on the flip of that, if they don't have coffees, what they can do to support gut.
Yeah, so there's sort of two problems associated with the same system effectively. And so when we have the two copies, like I mentioned, that's going to create more and more activation of the immune system, and that's going to wear away the gut wall, the mucosal layer. And so for you, I mean, you're going to want to make sure if you have the two copies that you're shoring up that mucosal layer. And I recommend looking at maybe doing a mucosal barrier assessment. So there's things like blood spot zonulin, which I like the blood for zonulin. It's a good accurate marker for that. And then there's the histamine to DAO ratio. So DAO is diamine oxidase, and DAO is what breaks down the histamine, right? So when we have histamine, which basically is that immune response to anything that we're allergic to, or it's part of that whole immunologic thing that goes on, it creates inflammation in the body. When the histamine is high, it should be checked by the DAO, right? So you can look at this. You can actually get it looked at. And if you have high histamine and high DAO, your body's reacting to something, but at least it's appropriate because you have the high DAO to help break down that histamine. If the histamine's high and the DAO is low, then that would be representative of like a later stage mucosal injury, right? Your body's no longer making the DAO, and you may benefit from like taking the DAO enzyme, which you can do. Or there's likely mucosal injury taking place there. So again, the BPC 157 can be valuable there. Things like bone broth, things like glutamine, things like colostrum, if you can handle the dairy component, things like intermittent fasting. All of this can help to strengthen the mucosal barrier. And you'll find that if you do, in fact, have a mucosal injury, leaky gut, I mean, that's not the real term for it, but that basically opens the door for a lot of dysbiotic stuff, right? It makes it so that candida can overgrow easier, too much yeast, E. coli, you name it. These things can now work their way in because the mucosal barrier is there to protect you from those pathogenic bacteria. If it's compromised and it's weak, they're going to work their way in, and then they go ahead and start bullying out the beneficial species, the things that we want. So it causes dysbiosis, it causes food sensitivities, and you end up with this immune activation. And once that happens, that's the start of the autoimmune conversation, right? RA, hypothyroidism, like Hashimoto's, these things are all immune system related. And a lot of that comes from the gut and when that mucosal barrier is interfered with. So understand that genes are not something that we use to diagnose. So I'm not saying two copies equals autoimmunity. By no means am I saying that. But it increases the likelihood because your gut is too good at detoxifying things. So it is now going to cause immune system activation. With zero copies is the opposite problem. It doesn't mean you can't have mucosal issues, but it means your body is not detoxifying the things that we take in. To where the protocol to deal with that is improving gut detoxification, right? Things like, again, intermittent fasting. You can use binders, right? Activated charcoal. You can use structured silver. You can use things like beam minerals, which have some great gut detoxifying effects. You're going to want to be way more, intuitive about toxins in your diet, right? You're the people who are going to want to have the organic diet. You're going to want to soak your produce in some baking soda and get organic and use the right cookware. Those are the things I recommend for improving gut detox. But a mucosal barrier assessment is what I would recommend if you suspect leaky gut. That's the only way to know.
Great. Yes, sir.
This is a long answer, but it's a complicated pathway, that one.
But it's a good answer. It's a good answer. And it's good to not strip out important detail. Oh, yeah. The next question we had coming to us was asking about the use of borax to support immune, amongst other things. So borax is a common cleaning agent. It's a salt, effectively. And the rationale that is given is it can be a source for trace minerals, and if your body's deficient in that, it can be supportive of it. The question was, is there use for immune support? And I will offer categorically, absolutely not. I'm not one always to take strong stance on things, but I would offer this can be very dangerous. First and foremost, when you purchase a box of borax, it is to a standard of a cleaning product. It is not to a standard of human consumption. Meaning, anytime you eat a food, right, there's been testing to say, is this actually food? Is there no trace of contamination from bacteria or other sorts of things? When you have a cleaning product, it's a different set of safety standards. So independent of is borax healthy or not, we aren't sure that what you're getting in that box is going to be actually borax and something that is safe to be consumed. Now, specific to borax salt, if you're concerned about being low in trace minerals, number one, this is not scientifically shown to support complete that or to support immune system. If you're looking for those supports, there are both supplements as well as other ways that you can go about doing that. And I would really encourage you not to take borax as a health thing. I appreciate there's a lot of conversation on social media around this fixed this for me and it was a miracle cure. I also appreciate that in times where access to healthcare isn't all that great, and sometimes we want something like this to be helpful, it's not. And I say this to the end, not to be unpopular, but I don't want you harmed. So please, no borax. It's not helpful to the immune, and it could be very harmful, especially for that statement of it's not qualified or reviewed as a food. And so you don't actually know what's going to be going into the system if it's safe. All right, next set of questions. Really sits around, Justin, if you want to go into this, because I know you love blood testing, discussing is serum vitamin D blood testing the best way to go about assessing vitamin D status? So close.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where there's even within serum testing, there is like different forms and different things that they're looking at. To date, I would say that the 25OH, right, which would be 25 hydroxy vitamin D, is the main one that you want to look at, just because it gives you kind of the most total picture of serum vitamin D. So that's the one that is considered the gold standard, and it would be the one that I would recommend as far as keeping your eyes on it. This is kind of an evolving thing, right? Like they keep on finding new ways to sort of locate vitamin D in the body. And to date, I would say that's the one that's going to give you kind of the most reliable screenshot of that. So that's what I would recommend. Do you have any different kind of tools or tactics that you like to kind of lean on for that?
I know there's a few new tests out there that claim they can look at the cellular, like how much vitamin D is actually sitting within the cell. I have not found those yet clinically useful. It's not to say that they're not. I just, so far, my experience with serum testing and how I see that being a needle guide has been best for me. I think until I see a compelling enough case for the new testing that comes out, insofar as it sincerely changes clinical direction and it shifts difficult cases, I stick with serum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess the last question we have from Mary is saying that, do we report on genes that influence magnesium? Because Justin had talked about magnesium, so close, audience, so close. Magnesium being really important to vitamin D. And right now, no, we do not report on that by and large because the body is so happy and excited to take in magnesium in many different forms. And so there isn't really, to my awareness yet, a gene that will, outside of like a plain mutation, there aren't really SNPs that speak to you're better or worse at this. Yeah, so it's more evaluating where you're getting magnesium. Are you getting sufficient amounts within diet?
Yeah, and the right types too, right? I mean, there's so many different types, and it's really like recommending which form is dependent on what the issue is. I mean, some people, if you're going to use magnesium for muscle cramps, I mean, maybe a magnesium citrate, or if you're going to use it for sleep, maybe it's a glycinate. If you're going to use it for cognition, maybe a threonate, right? Like they all sort of have their different functions. Dr. K and I actually did a deep dive on magnesium as
Mhm.
well. So maybe search up that webinar because that was like an ingredient spotlight thing that we did. And we really went pretty deep on magnesium in that one, but it's something I'm a big fan of. And yeah, it's absolutely useful for the vitamin D pathway. And it's something that the more stressed we are, the body burns through magnesium. So we need to replenish it. You kind of know right away if you went overboard because of the bowel tolerance component of it.
Yeah.
And there's some dirtier forms, right? Like oxide is not necessarily as clean as some of these other ones, but they
Yeah.
all have their use. And magnesium is one of those things that I've had in my kind of essentials daily thing for a long time for good reason. Over 300 enzymatic things that it does in the body. So I'm a fan of it and using it on a daily basis.
Mhm. Yeah, I love malate for, especially since we're talking about mitochondria and supportive immune. Malate jumps right into the Krebs cycle, which is part of that energy production. So malate for the chronically ill, for those that are looking for immune support, one of my favored. All right, sir. I think we're getting close to dancing time.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I always value when you're on these because you teach me the practical side of science and medicine. So I'm very grateful for the little steps that you teach our audience to be taking. So thank you. Thank
Thank you. It's been a while since we've done one, Dr. K. I feel like it's been a few
you.
weeks and it was more than due. But so thank you for rolling up as you do, and thanks everybody for coming and spending some time.
Mm.
I hope you guys learned something. Sorry about the volume issues we were having there, but hopefully you were able to absorb some of the information, and we'll keep on keeping on as we do here.
Oh, look at you, little Curtis Mayfield reference. I love it. Audience, before we bid you adieu, this is something that you can be doing that is spectacular for your immune system. You know how everyone has their own fish story, and every time they talk about, I caught this fish, it gets bigger and bigger. This is my fish, and every time I talk about it, it gets bigger and bigger, and I'm okay with that. There has been research that looks into, we know that exercise helps with mental health, and the question was, what is the best sort of exercise? And when you think of mental health in terms of cognition, so capacity to think, and mental health in terms of feeling good, the happy and the joy, dancing came out as the best form of exercise. So at the end of every webinar, to the end of reducing stress, which will then in turn support your immune system, we shall dance out. And the more people I talk to, the more I find out secretly dance with us, which makes me delighted. So audience, we are going to dance out. Thank you so very much for being here.